I believe that Jesus deliberately chose to use the original Passover calendar of Moses that he established for his Last Supper.
Ladies and gentlemen, in case you're not following, this is a very big deal. Before we get into our conversation, my name is Eric Metaxas, and this channel exists to bring you a biblical perspective on today's news, culture, and hot-button issues. If you're new here or not, welcome, and be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you are notified when new videos get posted. As most of you know, it is not typical of me to address any of my guests as Sir anything, but it is my privilege right now to be able to talk to someone whom I can and I think should address as Sir Colin. Sir Colin is Colin Humphreys. He is Director of Research at the Department of Materials Science and Metallurgy at the University of Cambridge. We are going to be talking with him about a book titled The Mystery of the Last Supper, Reconstructing the Final Days of Jesus. Sir Colin from Cambridge, welcome.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Eric.
It's delightful to have discovered you and your book. I'm a little surprised that I didn't know of you and of the book before rather recently. What is the subject of the book? In other words, when people hear the title, The Mystery of the Last Supper, most people are unaware that there's a mystery. So to what mystery are you in the title referring?
So there's been a mystery which people haven't talked about very much, although the theologians talk about it, that the Gospel of John, let's start with it. Matthew, Mark and Luke's Gospels say the Passover meal, the Last Supper that Jesus held was a Passover meal, and John says it was before the Passover meal. And this has led to a lot of discussion among scholars, and most of them say John is right, or Matthew, Mark, and Luke are wrong, or the other way around. And I try to approach it with the view that it's unlikely that these gospel writers are wrong about this, because a Passover meal is a very well-known Jewish meal, so they wouldn't mistake an ordinary meal for a Passover meal. And so I wrote this book, and at the end of the book, I say they're all telling the truth. They all agree. And the solution to this is that Matthew, Mark, and Luke are using a different Passover, a different calendar to describe what the events of the last week of Jesus. So what I find in the book is that John is using the official calendar that the Jewish priests were using in the 1st century AD, and Jesus chose not to use that calendar for his Last Supper. He chose to use the original Passover calendar of Moses that he established. So Jesus held his Last Supper a couple of days earlier than in the official calendar, so it coincided with the calendar that Moses set up, recorded in the book of Exodus, which I reconstructed. So I worked with astronomers. I reconstructed the official Jewish calendar in the 1st century and the Jewish calendar and this earlier Jewish calendar.
All right, I just want to frame this for my audience. Ladies and gentlemen, in case you're not following, this is a very big deal. This is hugely significant. The reconciliation of what had hitherto appeared to be contradictions in the Gospels. If you have a high view of Scripture, as any Christian should, you know that there cannot be contradictions. There can only be seeming contradictions, but the seeming contradictions give a lot of fodder to those who have a very low view of Scripture and a low view of the Bible in general. And so over the centuries, theologians and others have tried to reconcile these seeming contradictions, often without success. So it seems to me that you, Sir Colin Humphreys, having done this very recently, I know the book came out in 2011, you've done something that has puzzled innumerable people for literally centuries. F.F. Bruce, the great scholar F.F. Bruce, who wrote a book, a very small, important book called The New Testament Documents, Are They Reliable? Magnificent book, magnificent scholar. F.F. Bruce himself called this the thorniest problem in the New Testament. So I want to know, how is it, Sir Colin Humphreys, that you found yourself looking into this. It's not typical of metallurgists, of which you are one, to be looking into these kinds of theological conundrums. How is it? What is your story that led you ultimately to look into and then solve this absolutely central mystery of the New Testament?
Well, that is a good question, and it all started when my father gave my younger daughter, when she was 8 years old, a book called Great Men of History. I guess today you'll call it Great People of History. This is called Great Men of History. And each person in the book, it was a child's book, each person in the book had a particular great person it was considering. So it considered, Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great. It may have considered J.F. Kennedy, I'm not sure. Probably not, he wasn't historical enough. But the frontispiece of the book, it gave these people's names and their dates of death and their dates of birth and dates of death. And against everyone, Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, and so on, it had their dates of birth and death. And against Jesus, it said born 4 BC, died 30 AD, And my daughter said to me, Daddy, why is it we know when all these other people were born and died, and we don't know when Jesus born and died? And I thought, that's a really good question. And that set me off thinking about this. And I thought, let's see if we can determine the date of the crucifixion. So that's what got me started.
And before you continue, I just have to ask you, were you raised as a person of serious Christian faith, or was this something that got serious for you later in life? What is your story?
Yes, so my story, I was raised in a Christian family, and I was born in a Baptist church. In fact, brought up in a Baptist church. I was baptized when I was 14. But then I did what a number of people did. I think I in the sixth form at school, I wondered whether Christianity was right, and let me tell you my story of my conversion, because I wondered if Christianity was right or not. And I went to university, and I thought, at university, I'll have to sort out whether Christianity is right or not. And I read a gospel, and I imagined I was there. And it's amazing when you do this, if you think of the gospel and Jesus is there speaking. And I decided what many people decided, that Jesus was either mad, or he was bad, or he was right. It was right. I then decided that he was telling the truth, but I also decided that I was having a great time at university, and I didn't want to become a Christian then. I put it off to later life. And I think a number of people do that as well, and I did this. But I kept going to church because there were some rather attractive girls there. And so I just went to church. And after church, the minister had us round to his home for a little discussion group. And I was walking back from his home in London. I was at university in London. And a person next to me, he said to me, Colin, you're a Christian. I want to become a Christian. Tell me how I become a Christian. And I thought, what do I do? Because I've just decided not to become a Christian. So I thought I mustn't destroy his faith. So I said, why don't you go to the minister and talk to the minister? But then I went back to where I was living, and I thought, I can't sit on the fence anymore. And I gave myself to Jesus again. So that's my conversion story.
What year, if you're willing to share it, did this occur?
Right. So I'm getting on. I'm approaching middle age, but from the wrong direction. So this year I was at university. This was in my first year at university, which was 1960. So it's a long time ago.
1960. My goodness. You look very young for somebody approaching middle age from any direction. But how wonderful. So you've been a Christian these 63 years. That's extraordinary. And but of course you're a metallurgist, you're a scientist. Did you know then at the University of London that you wished to pursue a career in science?
I did know then, yes, because science, I was passionate about science then, and I then became passionate about Christianity as well.
Are you worried about retirement, wondering if you've saved enough, or fearing you might not be able to retire at all? My friends at Noble Gold Investments have helped thousands turn uncertainty into security. Imagine replacing sleepless nights with the confidence that your retirement is safe and protected No more fear of market crashes, inflation, or outliving your savings. Contact Noble Gold Investments to discover how the power of gold can help build the future you deserve. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com. Secure your retirement with just one click. If you believe the scriptures are the word of God, you know that any contradiction is only a seeming contradiction. So you, Sir Colin, were pulled into this mystery quite a long time ago. How did it proceed? How did you yourself figure this out? And what year? Because I know the book came out in 2011, but when did you figure this out for yourself and know that you had reconciled this gigantic mystery, had solved the problem?
So I started thinking about this mystery probably 20 years before that. And so this book has taken 20 years, as it were, to write. And so I'll just say what the puzzle really is. So if you look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke's gospel, the disciples say to Jesus, "Where shall we go to prepare the Passover for you?" And while Jesus is eating the meal, he says to them, "I've earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer." Right? So there's no doubt it's a Passover meal. On the other hand, you go to John's gospel, and at the trials of Jesus, that's after this meal, after Jesus has been arrested, the Jews say to I think they say to Pilate, they cannot enter this trial because they haven't yet eaten the Passover. And John also indicates that in other places that the Passover hasn't been eaten. And then John presents the crucifixion of Jesus as being at the same time of the Passover meal. So the Last Supper didn't precede it, the crucifixion at the same time. And Paul says, Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us. So the image is, in the Bible, Jesus is the Passover lamb. So how can it be? This is the mystery. And so that's the mystery, which I think it took me 20 years to sort out. That's the mystery I believe I solved.
And so at the heart of it, then, what is the solution? How is it that you can reconcile these seemingly contradictory pieces of evidence?
So what I found out, the first thing I found out was if you go back to the 1st century AD, there were a number of different calendars that people used. So the Romans used the Roman calendar, which we still use today, called the Julian calendar, then became the Gregorian calendar. But then the Jewish people, they had their official calendar. And the Essenes, this tribe of people called the Essenes, they had a different calendar still. And the Samaritans had a different calendar. There are a lot of calendars around. And so I thought, well, which calendar were the gospel writers using? And John is using the official calendar. And in fact, when he writes, John he calls it the Jewish Passover. And, why would he do that? I mean, they knew what the Passover was. Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't do this. He says a Jewish Passover. So it's a hint. He is using the official Jewish calendar. Now, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, I believe, were using an earlier calendar. And I believe that Jesus deliberately, let's just go back a second. When was the official Jewish calendar introduced? The official Jewish calendar was introduced when, way back at the time of the exile, when the Jews were captured, went into Babylon, that's when the official Jewish calendar was introduced. And we know that because the names of Jewish months, they took over from the Babylonian calendar. So the first month of the Jewish year, this is a bit technical, so the first month of Jewish year was called Nisan, and in the Babylonian calendar it was called Nisanu. And so and similarly with the other months. So the Jews in captivity in Babylon would have been forced to have used the Babylonian calendar, and that's when this official Jewish calendar started. Before that, when they were not in exile, they would have used the calendar that Moses established, and I was able to reconstruct that, and that was a different calendar. And when Jesus had his Last Supper, in which he said to them, he had the wine and the bread, if you remember, he said, "This is the new covenant in my blood." So he would say, Moses had the old covenant, this is a new covenant. I've chosen to use the Moses calendar so I can celebrate my Last Supper with you on the date of, on the anniversary of the official Moses calendar. And that, in fact, was a calendar that the Samaritan Jews, and I found that out as well. So Jesus, who had great sympathy, I think, with the Samaritans, although he realized they weren't quite worshipping the right God, but in his parables, for example. So he used this calendar with his disciples, and that was, I think, deliberate to make his Last Supper he chose to have on the official date, or on the commemoration date of the Moses original calendar.
Jesus then, it seems to me, was correcting things in calling this the Passover meal.
Yes, that's right. So Jesus was saying that basically when the Jews went into captivity in exile in Babylon, they changed their calendar, and technically they were not celebrating it on the exact date.
This is huge. Sir Colin, I have to ask you, when you realized what you had done, did it strike you as a little bit amazing that you should be able to solve this great mystery of the ages?
Yes, it did strike me as amazing, but not that amazing in the sense that what I had to do to solve the problem was to reconstruct these early calendars. And most theologians are not really able to do that. And you can reconstruct the early calendars because they were observational calendars where, for the Jews, the first day of a month was the first time they saw the new lunar crescent in the sky. And we know enough about astronomy, we can calculate way back, 2,000 years ago, when they would have seen the first lunar crescent in the sky. So I worked with an astronomer on this. And so theologians, they're not used to doing this.
Well,
Eric,
listen, isn't this the case that we see this over and over and over and over, that people who are working in one discipline are typically blinkered? They do not have the ability to see past their own noses or their own fields, and they oftentimes sneer at anyone who is working in what we can call an interdisciplinary fashion. They sneered at C.S. Lewis. They sneer at anyone who seems to go outside of the hidebound orthodoxy, which we find in the academy. And it's a scandal, really, that how specialists are so specialized that they can't see past their own noses, as I've said. So you dared, really, to look past your own field, or you dared to work outside your own field of expertise, which is metallurgy and science. What gave you the confidence, in a sense, to do that, to be willing to work with astronomers, to be willing to look into things that weren't in your field of expertise? What gave you that courage?
I think I got that courage from the belief that the Bible was right, and also that it would be astonishing if the gospel writers got this wrong. I mean, the Passover meal was such a special meal for, there were witnesses there. All 12 disciples were there at the Passover meal, and there were probably women and so on there as well. There were a lot of witnesses to what the meal was. And so the early church, they would have thrown out the gospel if there'd been some crazy mistake. And the early Christians, they knew there were these various, the early Jews as well as Christians, they knew there was different calendars in existence. It didn't bother them. And it's only us who fail to understand the situation in the first century AD. And so I thought, I have this scientific ability, and it's good to use science to help, look at some biblical problems.
It seems to me, if I'm tracking with what you're saying, that Jesus was in celebrating that Passover meal before the Passover that was about to be celebrated, he was making a bold and revolutionary statement in doing that. Would the apostles around him have been aware of what he was doing, of the revolutionary statement he was making, of linking back to Moses? Was there a consciousness at that time that there were two calendars and that most people were working with one calendar, but that the other one nonetheless existed? I
think the disciples would have been well aware of this. I think Jesus would have explained to them what was happening. I mean, Gospels are an abridged version of events, and John tells us if we wrote everything, which was Jesus said, there wouldn't be space in all the books in the universe. So I think they would have been well aware of this. And I also think that, God had this great salvation plan before the earth was created, before the universe was created. And in this plan, Jesus was the Passover lamb. And to emphasize that, Jesus had to be sacrificed when the Passover lambs were being sacrificed for the Passover meal later that, same Jewish day. And so everything fits together in a most remarkable way in what Jesus managed to maneuver, as it were, and engineer.
Well, so it seems even more amazing to me
Yes.
that it's not just that you have you've solved a mystery or you've reconciled a seeming contradiction, but that in doing that, you've pointed to something even greater than a mere reconciliation. The idea that Jesus was prophetically doing something, that he was doing something as a prophetic act, that he was saying, I am the new Moses, this is the new Passover, that he was saying all of that. But of course, it's really extraordinary that it would take us nearly 2 millennia to see this again.
It is extraordinary, I agree, but I think maybe we're living in special times as well, and and God is revealing these things to us, by scientific means. So things like what the Star of Bethlehem may have been, I think we can only really say in these more recent times, when we've got the scientific knowledge to do calculations which get you back 2,000 years ago.
Well, I think that's what's so extraordinary to me is that it is only being revealed to us now, and this is not lost on God. This is not just something that's happening, but that God has, in all of these millennia and centuries, been planning for these things to be revealed now. So, of course, the question becomes, why now? What is it now? Why is God revealing these things now? I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, it is a good question. I mean, I just think, I remember reading this prophecy, there'll be wars of rumors of wars. And I remember reading this maybe 40 years ago, and I thought, this is very unlikely. You go back sort of 40 years, there weren't that many wars around. And I thought, the world is going to get a more and more peaceful place, and people aren't going to, that's like savages, killing each other. And now look at the situation now, major war in Ukraine, major war in Israel and Palestine.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Folks, the book is The Mystery of the Last Supper, Reconstructing the Final Days of Jesus. Astonishing stuff. Sir Colin Humphreys, thank you so much.
It's been a great pleasure talking to you, Eric. Thank you very much.